This was the most expensive problem in ancient history, and the one that destroyed more empires than enemy armies ever did. Not strategy, not courage, not even leadership. Money, or more precisely, the ability to keep paying the men holding the weapons. Empires didn't collapse because they lost battles. They collapsed because they couldn't afford their armies anymore. And when the pay stopped making sense, loyalty evaporated faster than ideology ever could. Welcome to the financial historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Before banks, before income taxes, before central banks or government bonds, every empire faced the same brutal question. How do you keep hundreds of thousands of armed men fed, equipped, and loyal year after year? Soldiers don't fight on principles alone. They fight because they expect something in return: security for their families, status, land, or cold hard payment. And once armies stopped being temporary militias and became permanent institutions, war turned into a payroll problem. Ancient states couldn't print money at will. They couldn't run permanent deficits. If the treasury ran dry, there was no lender of last resort waiting in the wings, which meant every empire had to anchor its military power to something real: metal pulled from the earth, land taken by force, or labor extracted from conquered populations. These systems weren't abstract. They shaped how societies were organized, who bore the burden, and who paid the price when things went wrong. No empire understood this better or pushed it further than Rome. At its height, the Roman Empire maintained an army of roughly 400,000 men, spread across 3 continents. That wasn't a fighting force. It was a standing institution. Every soldier expected regular pay, retirement benefits, and in many cases, land after service. This wasn't optional generosity. It was the cost of keeping the empire intact. Rome's borders didn't hold because of patriotism. They held because soldiers were compensated reliably, at least at first. The backbone of Roman military pay was silver. Not promises. Not paper. Actual metal. The denarius, Rome's standard silver coin, became the engine of imperial power. Soldiers were paid in it. Taxes were collected in it. Trade depended on it. And the legitimacy of Roman authority was stamped directly onto its surface. But silver doesn't appear out of thin air. Rome needed vast quantities of it, and that requirement quietly dictated the empire's expansion. The conquest of Hispania, modern Spain, wasn't just about prestige or security. It was about access to some of the richest silver mines in the known world. These mines didn't just enrich Rome. They financed its legions. The empire quite literally dug its army out of the ground. As long as silver flowed, the system worked. Soldiers trusted their pay. Merchants accepted Roman coins. Taxes moved efficiently through the system. The army enforced order, protected trade routes, and ensured that silver kept circulating back to the state. It was a closed loop of power, money, and force. But geology has limits. And eventually, Rome began to feel them. By the 2nd century, the easy silver was gone. Mining became more expensive. Military campaigns grew costlier. The empire's borders expanded faster than its revenue base. And instead of confronting the structural problem, Roman leaders chose the oldest financial illusion in history. They diluted the money. The denarius still looked the same. Same stamp, same authority. But slowly, quietly, the silver content was reduced. A little copper here, a little alloy there. On paper, soldiers were still being paid the same amount. In reality, their purchasing power was shrinking. At first, no one noticed. Then prices started rising. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Soldiers complained that their pay no longer covered their needs. So the state raised wages using more debased coins, which pushed prices higher, which forced taxes upward, which squeezed farmers and urban workers who had no leverage to negotiate their income. Inflation didn't announce itself as a crisis. It crept in as a series of small compromises, each one defensible, each one necessary. And together, they hollowed out the system. The Roman army adapted faster than civilians. Soldiers began demanding bonuses. Emperors who failed to pay were replaced sometimes violently by those who could. Loyalty shifted from the state to whoever controlled the treasury. Military power stopped serving Rome. Rome began serving its military. Meanwhile, the people paying the real cost had no say in the matter. Farmers were taxed more aggressively. Trade became unstable. Savings lost value, and confidence in the currency eroded. What began as a clever workaround to a resource constraint became a slow-motion transfer of wealth from the population to the armed state. There's a quiet irony here. Rome didn't fall because it abandoned silver. It fell because it depended on it too much. When the metal stopped flowing, the illusion of stability collapsed with it. By the 3rd century, the denarius was almost pure copper. Soldiers were no longer reliably paid in money at all, but in food rations and land grants. The economy fragmented, trust evaporated, and the empire that once conquered the Mediterranean with coins stamped in silver began unraveling under the weight of its own payroll. If there were a gold medal for financial denial, Roman policymakers would still be on the podium. But Rome wasn't unique. It was simply early, and the pattern it revealed would repeat itself across history in different forms, under different banners, with the same consequences. Because once you understand how an empire pays its army, you understand who truly holds power. And once that system starts to strain, collapse isn't a matter of if only when. When Rome's silver-based system began to fracture, it didn't invent a new solution. It fell back on something older, more brutal, and far less stable. Land loot, and promises of future reward. And in doing so, it revealed the truth every empire eventually learns the hard way. You can pay your army with money. You pay it with expansion. And expansion never lasts forever. Long before Rome faced that dilemma, other empires had already built entire military systems around it. The Assyrian Empire was one of the earliest and clearest examples. Its army was feared across the ancient Near East, not just for its effectiveness, but for its purpose. Assyrian soldiers weren't paid primarily with salaries. They were paid with conquest itself. Plunder, captives, and land were the reward. Cities that resisted weren't simply defeated, they were stripped, deported, and reorganized to feed the Assyrian war machine. This wasn't random cruelty. It was economic design. The Assyrian state didn't need to sustain a complex monetary system because war funded itself. Each successful campaign replenished the army, rewarded loyalty, and reinforced the terror that made future conquests easier. Buelin's wasn't a byproduct of the system. It was the system. But there was a catch. When expansion slowed, the incentives collapsed. Soldiers accustomed to reward through conquest had no patience for restraint, and when the empire could no longer feed its army through victory, it was consumed by rebellion, fragmentation, and internal collapse. The same logic appeared centuries later in the early Islamic caliphates, though in a far more structured form. Here, soldiers were paid through state stipends, funded by taxes imposed on conquered territories. Land taxes, trade levies, and religiously defined obligations flowed back to the center, where they were redistributed to the military elite. As long as the empire expanded, revenue grew. As long as revenue grew, soldiers remained loyal. But when borders stabilized and conquest slowed, the system strained. Administrative costs rose. Tax burdens deepened, and the political unity that expansion once masked began to fracture. Growth wasn't just encouraged, it was required. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, China was building a completely different solution, one that relied less on money and more on organization. Under the Han Dynasty, the state maintained massive armies without relying exclusively on coinage. Instead, it mobilized society itself. Taxes were paid not only in currency, but in grain, cloth, and labor. Peasants were required to serve periods of forced work building roads, supplying granaries, transporting goods, and supporting military logistics. Soldiers were fed directly from state-controlled stores. Campaigns were planned around supply lines rather than treasure chests. The system was efficient, centralized, and remarkably resilient, but it came at a human cost that rarely appears in heroic histories. Entire populations lived under permanent obligation to sustain an army they would never join and a frontier they would never see. It worked because the state had the administrative power to enforce it. When that power weakened, The system unraveled just as surely as Rome's silver economy did. And then there were empires that paid their armies not with money, land, or grain, but with people. The Aztec Empire had no standing salaried army in the modern sense. Warriors fought for status, honor, and the right to extract tribute. Conquered cities were forced to deliver food, textiles, raw materials, and captives on a regular schedule. These payments sustained the capital and rewarded the military class that enforced the system. This wasn't chaos. It was bureaucratic. Tribute lists were meticulously recorded. Campaigns were organized to maintain fear and compliance rather than territorial expansion. The army functioned as both enforcer and tax collector. But this system was brittle. When tribute stopped flowing, the political structure collapsed almost instantly. The empire had no financial buffer, no surplus mechanism, no way to adapt when extraction failed. Different civilizations, different tools, same underlying truth. Armies are never paid in abstraction. They are paid with something real: metal, land, labor, or lives. And whatever that something is ends up shaping the entire society beneath it. This is where the past starts to feel uncomfortably familiar. Modern states like to believe they solved this problem. Today, armies are paid with budgets, bonds, and balance sheets. Salaries arrive digitally. Equipment is financed through long-term contracts. Wars are funded through deficits instead of conquest. But strip away the language, and the structure hasn't changed nearly as much as we pretend. Military spending is still treated as untouchable. When budgets tighten, social programs are debated. Defense budgets are protected. Inflation still quietly shifts the cost of that spending onto the population. Debt replaces tribute. Central banks replace silver mines. And the burden still falls on people who never voted on the system that governs them. The tools evolved. The logic didn't. Inflation today functions the same way coin debasement did in Rome. It allows states to meet obligations without openly raising taxes. It transfers purchasing power away from savers and wage earners. And it disproportionately protects those closest to the source of money creation. Nothing says stable system like needing invisible mechanisms to fund the most visible force on Earth. The most dangerous illusion isn't that history repeats itself. It's that we believe we've outgrown it. Empires don't fall because they lose wars. They fall because the systems that pay for force become unsustainable. When the cost of maintaining power exceeds the society's ability to bear it, collapse doesn't arrive as a single event. It arrives as erosion trust first, then stability, then cohesion. This is why understanding economic history isn't academic trivia. It's financial because if you don't understand how money flows toward power, if you don't see who gets paid first when systems strain, and if you don't recognize inflation, debt, and extraction for what they are, then history doesn't need to repeat. It will simply move forward, and you'll feel the consequences without ever seeing the cause. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.